I'm Diana Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have wrapped up a high-profile visit to Ukraine. The two U.S. secretaries met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and assured him America will help him achieve his goal of defeating Russia. They also announced the U.S. is providing $713 million in new military aid to Ukraine and allied countries. U.S. officials say America's total military assistance to Ukraine has now reached $3.7 billion. Meanwhile, the Russian offensive shows no signs of slowing down. This video, posted to social media and verified by ABC News, shows the moment a Russian missile hit a residential building, killing at least 8 people. And videos circulating online show an explosion at a fuel depot in Bryansk, Russia. So far, there's been no official confirmation of the cause. And this all comes as Russia wages a new offensive in eastern Ukraine. Let's bring in ABC's Marcus Moore live in Irpin, Ukraine, along with Alex Perche in Washington, and ABC News contributor and former Marine Colonel Stephen Ganyard for more on this. Marcus, Orthodox Easter was this weekend, but President Zelensky says that Russia rejected a proposal for an Easter truce. What's the latest on the ongoing negotiations?
Yeah, well, Diane, first of all, this was a very different Easter celebration for people here in Ukraine for obvious reasons. And we know that President Zelensky has said that he still is and has been open to meeting with Vladimir Putin and trying to negotiate peace. But at this point, we don't know what the nature of those negotiations have been and how much progress they have been able to make. As you've already said, that the fighting, the shelling continued over the weekend, despite calls for a ceasefire. And so it remains to be seen exactly what type of negotiations are happening and how much success they'll be able to have in the days ahead.
Now, Steve, Secretary Blinken says Russia has already failed to achieve its stated goals in Ukraine. Now the UK Defense Ministry says Russia's shifting its focus to fully occupy the Donbas regions, but that they have yet to achieve a significant breakthrough there. So how is Ukraine holding off Russia's advance, and can they keep it up?
Well, Diane, I think what the U.S. is really seeing, and I think what the Ukrainians are seeing, are probes. The Russians are trying to find weak spots in the line. So while this offensive in the Donbass has begun, it isn't the all-out attack with huge artillery barrages that the U.S. and the Ukrainians are feared. So it's early on in this part of the war. It is a new phase of the war. It will be very different. It will be much more reliant on artillery and tanks, the kinds of things that the Russians used to be good at. But as of right now, it's just probing attacks, and we haven't seen the full thrust of Russia's might.
And Alex, President Biden is formally nominating the current Slovakian ambassador, Bridget Brink, to serve as ambassador to Ukraine. What does that mean?
Well, look, I mean, this is someone who is tested, who actually knows the region. As you mentioned, served as a former ambassador to Slovakia and now serving as this U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, according to a senior State Department official, a career-long diplomat as the U.S. tries again to prop up its support for the Ukrainian government in its fight against Russia.
And Marcus, in Mariupol, humanitarian corridors did not open as scheduled because Russian troops in the area did not confirm a ceasefire. So how dire is the situation there, especially for those civilians still trapped?
Well, Diane, from everything that we've heard, the situation in Mariupol is incredibly dire. The city council there says that as many as 1,000 people, mostly women and children, are holed up in that steel plant, and they have no access to food or water and no safe exit. And I should point out that, to your question about negotiations, President Zelensky has said that if the people who are there, the fighters, as well as the civilians who are in Mariupol, if they are harmed in any way, he has said that there will be no more room for negotiation. So what happens in Mariupol will be significant for a number of reasons, not only symbolically, but of course, strategically, as Russia has been trying so hard to secure that city as they work to take over the Donbas region of Ukraine.
And Steve, the U.S. is now sending $713 million in new aid to Ukraine and to other allies, in addition to the billions in aid already provided. What impact could that have, and how important is this aid to Ukraine's defense?
Well, hopefully Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin had a better chance to understand exactly what the Ukrainians need over the weekend. Right now, the kinds of things that the Ukrainians need is changing. The kinds of things that they've asked for early on in the war are very different from what they're going to need to defend in the Donbass. So that means more heavy U.S. artillery. The U.S. is trying to scour all the former Eastern Bloc nations that are now part of NATO for that Soviet-era kind of ammunition. So the U.S. ammunition and the kind of artillery that the U.S. uses is actually a different caliber. It's about 3 millimeters different. So you can't use U.S. Artillery shells in Russian equipment. So the challenge here is to go out and find what they can. But eventually, if this conflict continues on, the Ukrainians are going to need to change the kind of equipment that they use towards more U.S. or NATO sort of standard. And that will take time because now you have to retrain crews. So right now, it's all hands on deck, and we'll see if it's effective.
Alex, where do the diplomatic efforts go from here?
Well, Diane, I mean, that's the $100 million question, right? And certainly there have been positive talks. We've heard positive rhetoric from both sides, willing to meet at various points. But again, it's just been talk thus far, and we haven't seen any substantial action. And then also, whenever you look at some of the other bodies, whether it be the UN Security Council, President Zelensky being openly critical of this body, saying that essentially, if it doesn't act, it should dissolve itself. The one thing that we can say thus far is that the U.S. is continuing its support of Ukraine. The allies are continuing its support of Ukraine. And right now, we don't see an end to this conflict.
All right, Alex Brachet, Steve Ganyard, Marcus Moore, thank you. And a new COVID outbreak in Beijing is raising fears that China's capital could be sent into a hard lockdown. Lockdown in Shanghai is now entering its 5th week, but cases and deaths there are still rising. ABC's Lama Hassan has the latest on how the country's zero COVID policy is taking a toll. Hi, Lama.
Yeah, and good morning to you, Diane. This morning, China's battle with COVID-19 is intensifying. In the capital, Beijing, authorities are on high alert, closely tracking cases. Now, in its largest district, reporting at least 46 cases. That's the highest number so far in Beijing's latest surge. Mass testing sites for 3.5 million residents in that district alone are now in place. People there have to get tested 3 times this week. They're fearing that another strict lockdown will be enforced soon, so people are rushing out to stock up on food. They're worried their city will start looking like Shanghai, where at least 25 million people have been shut in their homes for almost 4 weeks now. Workers in white hazmat suits have been putting up green fencing around buildings and neighborhoods where confirmed COVID cases have been found. They're calling it hard isolation. No one is allowed in or out of those buildings. Residents are describing it as COVID cages. And you can see in this nighttime video, some of the residents, they're trying to tear one of those fences down. Now, as China races to contain the virus, and with Shanghai being the country's crucial financial lockdown, these strict lockdown measures will likely have an impact on the world economy and disrupt supply chains. Diane.
All right, Lama Hassan, thank you. And earlier on Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos spoke exclusively with Dr. Deborah Birx. She was the first White House COVID coordinator for the Trump White House, and she's discussing her new book, Silent Invasion, the untold story of the Trump administration, COVID-19, and preventing the next pandemic before it's too late. Let's listen.
Your account of the time in the Trump White House is pretty excruciating, and I know they came to you, right, that they came to you several times before you actually said yes to the job. Do you wish you hadn't done it?
No. I'm glad I did it because I think I was the only one around the table that had on-the-ground pandemic experience. I had 20 years of experience battling HIV, TB, and malaria around the globe, including Zika, Ebola. And I really understood how practical and common sense you need to make things to work with communities to get everybody moving in the same direction.
Yet, as I said, the account is pretty excruciating of, given the actions of President Trump, the inactions at times of the White House. Was there any moment when you said, no, this was a mistake, I may be doing more harm than good?
I think every day I ask myself, but I always ask myself, what have I done today in relationship to the data? What has it taught me? Are we moving in the right direction? Are we learning in real time? Are we making a real difference to American lives on the ground? And that was my indicator. Every morning when I could, and every evening I could say yes, meant that we were making progress. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, so that everybody in America could see what was really happening, what was really getting done. Because if you don't understand what was happening, then you won't fix it for the next time. So I wanted to be very transparent about what went right and what didn't go right.
What may have been your toughest day in the White House. We all remember at that time when President Trump came to the podium in the press office and talked about investigating disinfectant as a possible treatment for COVID. Let's take a look.
Then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
Looks like he's looking at you. We all saw the look on your face. You write that you wanted to fall through the floor.
Yeah, I think it's really, and that's why I wrote about it in the book, because this was a tragedy on many levels. The first tragedy is the whole point of asking the DHS scientists to do the work was so children could get outside and play on playgrounds. And so we asked DHS scientists to look at disinfectant and its impact, because we knew it had an impact on COVID on the surfaces, and compare it to sunlight, because we knew sunlight had oxidative potential. And we wanted parents, spring was coming, we wanted them to be outside. All the New York playgrounds had been closed. And we thought if we presented the data, then parents would take their children back outside. He went, and as you can see, he wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the PhD scientists who presented the data and presented in that task force and then in the briefing. I didn't realize it. That scientists went into the Oval Office, and they started that discussion there, and they continued it in front of America. At the beginning, I didn't even know what was happening. I couldn't understand how disinfectant and sunlight for outdoor playground equipment became this, and I think the scientists and the president had talked about it having a potential therapeutic.
And then he called on you. And
Finally.
Yeah, he finally did call on you. You basically contradicted the president. What happened in the White House after that?
Well, many people don't know me, but I'm a pretty direct person. So I immediately went to his most senior staff and to Olivia Troy and said, this has to be reversed immediately. And by the next morning, the president was saying it was a joke. But I think he knew by that evening, clearly, that this was dangerous.
You did write that at one point you were muzzled by the White House.
Nationally. But at the same time, the communication team is out with me on the road, and we're going state by state, and I'm doing local press. So that was always the dichotomy, what was being said versus what was being done. And that's why I think having a book from someone who was actually in the West Wing, not someone who was in an agency or someone who was, covering it, but someone who actually saw what was happening day by day. So when the president would talk about decreasing testing, he was signing defense production acts of billions of dollars to increase testing. So that was my metric. Are we making progress on the core parameters that I think are critical to save American lives?
What was this pact you had with Dr. Fauci?
With all the doctors in the doctors group. Dr. Hahn, Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Redfield.
And what was it?
It was if any one of the individuals were under so much pressure and they were fired, that we would all leave together from the task force. And I think that was really important because I really wanted to protect Bob Redfield and Steve Hahn, and they were under enormous pressure.
Dr. Birx, thanks very much. The book Silent Invasion is out tomorrow.
Thank you, George.
And you can hear more from Dr. Birx when she sits down with our chief health and medical editor, Dr. Jennifer Ashton, tonight on Nightline. French President Emmanuel Macron has been reelected for a second term. The incumbent won his race against Marine Le Pen, a far-right candidate who ran on a campaign hostile to NATO. Our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, is in Paris with more. Hi, Mary.
Diane, good morning. Yeah, we are seeing a real sense of relief and an exhale from European leaders and the White House after French President Emmanuel Macron was able to hold off a challenge from the far-right nationalist Marine Le Pen with her anti-immigration and anti-NATO policies and her support and previous ties to Russia. There was a real fear here that a Le Pen victory would upend European unity and the fight to save Ukraine. But instead, Macron, after a very tight race, was able to win a decisive 59% of the vote. Now, overnight, President Biden tweeting his congratulations, saying that France is a key partner in addressing global challenges and saying he looks forward to our continued close cooperation. The German chancellor describing Macron's victory as a, quote, vote of confidence in Europe. Now, here in Paris, I can tell you Macron supporters who we've talked to say they do feel a very real sense of relief. Some telling me they were actually scared and fearful for the future of this country. But we did see some protests here overnight, as was expected, as is really the custom and the tradition here on Election Day in France. But Le Pen, no question about it, she put the world and global leaders on notice, appealing to voters with her populist policies. She was able to win 41% of the vote. That is the best finish by the far right in any French presidential election. And Diane Le Pen says that in and of itself is a victory.
All right, Mary Bruce, thanks for that. And current and former lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are paying tribute to Orrin Hatch, the longest-serving Republican senator in history. Hatch died over the weekend at the age of 88. Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl has more.
Good morning, Diane. Orrin Hatch sure made his mark on the U.S. Senate, not just the longest-serving Republican in Senate history, but also the sponsor or co-sponsor of 790 bills that became law. That shattered a Senate record. He was a staunch conservative, a fierce partisan, but some of his most significant accomplishments came by working with Democrats, including the Americans with Disability Act, the Children's Health Insurance Program, the Ryan White Care Act. Many of those came by working with Senator Ted Kennedy, somebody who was in many ways his political opposite. In fact, when Hatch ran for Senate, he later said that one of his motivations was to oppose people like Senator Kennedy, and then they became very close friends. President Biden put out a statement overnight calling Hatch an American original and a gentle soul who wrote poems and songs. I vividly remember him playing me one of those songs when I was a very junior reporter on Capitol Hill. I met with him in his Senate office building. At the end of the meeting, he said, "Do you want to hear something?" And he played me a song that he had written and produced and recorded with Jesse Jackson's daughter, Santina. He was absolutely an American original. Diane?
All right, Jonathan Karl, thanks for that. Coming up, Sherri Panini's husband is filing for divorce after standing by her side for more than 5 years after she faked her own kidnapping. New details when we come back. Welcome back. Sherri Papini's husband has filed for divorce and custody of their 2 children just days after she admitted to faking her own kidnapping in 2016. Papini now says she was actually hiding out with a former boyfriend. ABC's Kaylee Hartung is in Los Angeles with more.
Just days after confessing to faking her own kidnapping, Sherri Papini's marriage is over. Keith Papini filing for divorce from his wife of more than 12 years, requesting sole custody of the couple's 2 young children. In court documents obtained by ABC News, Keith writing, "I must act decisively to protect my children from the trauma caused by their mother."
Sherri's fraud, her fraudulent kidnapping, and then her cover-up efforts and all of the lies that she told to federal, state, and local authorities can be used against her in the custody case. Not only that, but she's going to be going to prison for at least 14 months. And so the court has to consider all of those things when it makes a custody order.
Keith also asking the court to free him from any obligations to provide Sherri financial support. The papers filed 2 days after Sherri pled guilty to 2 felony charges, lying to federal agents and mail fraud, admitting her 2016 abduction was a hoax.
I'm going to do everything I can to find my wife.
Keith speaking exclusively to ABC News just days after Sherri reappeared, describing the moment he learned she'd been found.
Then I get the phone and, "Oh my God, honey," and of course she's screaming, it's very emotional, and "I love you, I love you, I love you, oh my God, you're here, you're back, where are you?"
Keith shaken by the injuries Sherri said were inflicted on her by 2 Hispanic women who she claimed abducted her at gunpoint.
They branded her. And her poor face, I got like nauseated just looking at her. It was so hard for me to see her like that. And bruises were just intense, the bumps from, being hit and kicked and whatever else.
Keith publicly stood by his wife as she lied through a 5.5-year investigation into her disappearance. The divorce filing lists the day of Sherri's arrest last month as their date of separation, noting she hasn't even seen their children in 3 weeks. As she entered her guilty plea, facing up to 25 years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution fees, Sherri saying in a statement, "I am deeply ashamed of myself for my behavior and so very sorry for the pain I've caused." And Diana, judges granted temporary emergency orders giving Keith full custody of the kids and allowing Sherri to call or video conference her kids. Now, both of them are expected to be in court in 2 weeks for a divorce hearing, but Keith asked in his filing that the judge hold any decision on their permanent parenting arrangement until after her federal sentencing, which is set for July. Diane.
All right, Kaylee Hartung, thank you. And ABC News Live is taking a closer look at how the powerful synthetic opioid fentanyl is devastating cities across the country. ABC's Bob Woodruff spent time with an EMS team in Clarksburg, West Virginia, who's responding to the epidemic. Here's an early look at part 2 of Poisoned.
General Illness Company 61 responding.
That's us, 61.
This is a daily occurrence for the Clarksburg EMS team.
38-year-old female requested detox. She's in a blue hoodie in front of the library.
This woman is going through withdrawal and is seeking help.
Right there, he'll take care of it. Okay.
She was using last week. She has the urge to use again, and she doesn't want to.
They hope she ends up one of the lucky ones, because what this team sees most are overdoses.
Pretty daily, probably 2 or 3 times a day. Usually when you get one, you get 3 or 4. It's just 100 times worse.
Fentanyl is an opioid up to 50 times more powerful than heroin, killing people old or young.
There is no age. I've seen teenagers and I've seen 70-year-olds.
3 overdoses today alone.
So do you think this is going to stop?
I think it's going to get worse.
18, that's a 31-year-old female.
That's probably an overdose.
All right, thanks to Bob for that report. And you can tune into part 2 of Poisoned tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern on ABC News Live Prime with Lindsay Davis. Coming up, how some parents' bad behavior is driving referees to quit children's sports, what it means for youth athletics when we come back. Welcome back. Youth sports are facing a referee shortage attributed at least in part to parents' bad behavior. A new piece from the LA Times outlines the problems and possible solutions. Will Reeve has the details.
Those fists flying in these ugly scenes at football and baseball games belong, shockingly, to the parents in the stands. Bad behavior from parents at youth sporting events is leading some referees and umpires to say game over and leave their jobs in massive numbers. Daryl Stidham has been a Little League umpire for 6 years, but earlier this month, he'd finally had it and quit.
It just became a point where I talked to my wife one night and said, do I keep doing this? Do I risk the possibility of me being physically harmed like other officials?
According to a 2017 survey of 17,000 sports officials published by the National Association of Sports Officials, 87% say they've suffered verbal abuse and 47% have felt unsafe due to the behavior of spectators, coaches, or administrators. Earlier this month, umpire of 10 years Christy Moore was attacked after a 12-year-old softball game in Mississippi.
I was about 3 steps off the field, and she was right there, said, "Now what do you have to say to me?" Called me an ugly name and punched me.
The accused assailant was arrested and charged with simple assault. Moore is pressing charges. The case is ongoing.
There has to be stricter consequences for these actions to deter this kind of thing from happening, because it's becoming just way too commonplace.
Carlos Mejia coaches and is the director for girls at the New York Soccer Club. He says he's seeing referees leave year after year and that there needs to be guidelines between officials, parents, and the league.
Young referees are learning and developing to become better referees. Referees are going to make mistakes. We just have to support the process as best we can.
At some point, we have to start reversing the culture that has made this acceptable in literally beating up our officials over semantics.
All right, well, Reeve, thanks for that. And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis right after this.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.